David Cross, everybody. How cool is this?
Hello. Hello.
And
I'll adjust.
You've had an interesting day. You were out registering people to vote.
Yeah, just illegal aliens. And it was easy. No, we were, myself, I'm part of this group that is kind of growing by the day called the Comedy Resistance. And I went out there, I was with the Sklar brothers and, oh gosh, I want to make sure I get everybody's names correct. I don't remember last names. Ava, two local comics, Justin, Ava. Thank you so much. And some barbecue sauce. But,
Yeah. It's Austin. You got to have it.
Yeah, my pint of barbecue sauce. And oh gosh, a number of folks and some volunteers who are all kind of deputized because Texas has very stringent rules, and they're designed, of course, to disenfranchise people and make it more difficult to register to vote. And if you have registered to vote, but from an old address, not a current address, they will stop you. And that's one of the things that makes Texas so great. It's just the trust of humanity.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And so we went to UT campus, and we went to various places, and we kind of set up. And you know, I'm always a little oversensitive to not badgering people, not hectoring them, not following them around if they say no, and not being too obnoxious about it. So I think we did a good job. And it was much more successful than I anticipated.
And you guys are going around doing stand-up. I know you're doing it here at the festival, but this is stand-up traveling around with it too.
Yeah, this is there were kind of, in its nascent stages, they had done stuff. Patton Oswalt did something in 2016 with one of the guys. It was just him and this guy, and one of the, it's getting much more of a real viable organization now.
Yeah.
And yeah, we were talking today about how to figure out how to do this. And I think college campuses are pretty good because you get a lot of people who are 17, 18, 19 who haven't registered to vote. And that's all it is, just getting people to register.
I would think that a lot of people would have thought that you were too cynical to get into this kind of grassroots thing. And
Well, you know, it's one of those things, like right before I go out, I kind of psych myself out. I read A Christmas Carol. And I am cynical, but I'm also practical. And there's something in my current set that somebody even gave me some shit for. And it's a stance I've taken before when I've felt like we were at a specifically dangerous time. And it's very unpopular. And it happened this last election. I went on some show, and people were Chelsea Handler. I was doing that show on Netflix, and I said, I don't like Hillary Clinton. I disagree with her on most things. I don't trust her, but I will absolutely vote for her over Donald Trump, and for various reasons. And you know, and you get people who are like, and we got them today. You know, are you registered? I am registered, but I'm not voting. Like, okay, all right, and I just think it's irresponsible, if not for yourself, but for other people that might be affected. And there are so many people that are affected. And so I suck it up, and I make almost every time I make a vote that I'm like, oh God. And but I do it for my sister and sister-in-law who are gay and live in Georgia. I do it for a number of my friends. I do it for my Muslim friends. I do it for my daughter. I do it for, it's not about me going, you know, government's, it's a sham. The whole thing's, you know, it's for everybody else who are affected. And people, of course, that I don't know, you know, many of them here in Texas. So,
right.
You know.
Well, these are such strange times. And a lot of people think the strangest ever, but, of course, it was weird during Vietnam and at other different times.
I was around during the Civil War, and let me tell you, it was comparable.
Yeah.
It was comparable.
Yeah. But do you your last special, which, as far as I know, is the only time somebody walked anybody in the crowd of their TV special. It just normally happens. It's normally your biggest fans would show up to see your special.
Well, that happened, I'd say, 9 out of 10 shows.
Yeah.
I did. It didn't happen in Europe, but in the American shows, I would say 9 out of 10 I'd had. And some were very quiet. Like that woman who walked out was very quiet. They weren't, but some were very, very vocal about it, very upset. And what I think part of it is the cumulative effect. I truly don't.
Yeah, right.
And I'm not saying that trying to be funny. I think it's like I think some people just got to the point where like I've had it with the conservative bashing or the cop bashing, or like by the time it gets to the Blue Lives Matter bit,
Right.
That was like, I've had enough. And so I think it's kind of cumulative. I don't, but yeah, that was taped almost 2 years to the day right here in Austin.
Right, at the Moon Tower. And it really, if you go back and watch it now, because you really didn't believe in your heart, like most people didn't think that Trump was going to make it. And I thought,
Absolutely, yeah.
But it was there. I mean, you really could understand because you went after a lot of subjects. But what always makes me laugh about it is you started pretty light. You did spit about like a tattoo parlor. You know what I mean?
I do it. I'm about to go out on tour again starting in June, and I try to structure the shows because I mean it's also. I think it's counterproductive, I think, just to come out, and it's just not who I am, to come out and go, the president sucks. And it's not going to be an hour of that. And I don't enjoy an hour of, fill in the blank material. Like, it's an hour of gay comedy, an hour of Jewish humor, an hour of women's feminist humor, an hour, whatever. That's boring to me. And a lot of my stuff is really silly, light, just kind of anecdotal, goofy stuff, and I don't want to lose that part of me, and I think it's a fun part of doing stand-up, and so I always start at least 20 minutes, a third, if not longer, of the beginning of the set will be light, just so that at least the people who are walking out can at least go, well, the first half was funny. And I'm not joking though. I do try to really balance it out, and as I'm working on this set, which will be the tour that starts in June, and I've been working on stuff for about a month and a half now, and I'm dropping bits that I like, that are kind of reminiscent of other bits, but also going, that sense you have, it's just intuitive at this point, like, you know what, that's too much Trump stuff.
Right.
Get rid of that. It's just, I like it, but it's just too much. And I'm a little sensitive to people, I know there's some people who, it's also a you can't win situation, because there will be people who go, how come you only talked about Trump for 20 minutes? Or, who cares about your kid or whatever? And and then there'll be some people who are like, well, there he goes, bashing Republicans again. So you can't really win. But I try to be conscious of giving everybody something, at least. Well,
a couple of reasons is no matter what you do, whatever Trump joke you do is dated very quickly.
I talk about that, and it's really frustrating. And I talk about, I don't do them anymore, obviously, but I have whole bits that I dropped that I like, that made a pretty good point. But it's a reference. It's already been supplanted by some other outrageous thing, and you don't care about that other outrageous thing because that wasn't, even though it was wildly outrageous at the time, 2 weeks later, it's replaced by something even more egregious. And nobody cares about your take on the, whatever the shithole country's coming. Nobody like, what? That was 2004. What are you talking about?
Right.
And
But now it could literally be 2 weeks old and there's already been 40 things. I mean, if you look back, Dana Carvey did like Not Gonna Dead for like 4 years. 4 years, and everybody's like, that's fucking great, man. You know, he didn't have to change a thing.
Yeah.
You know? And like now, to keep up with it all. I mean, I don't know where he gets his energy. You know what I mean? If there's anything that you could say about the guy is he just keeps coming.
Well, it doesn't take a lot of energy to tweet racist, shitty things.
Yeah,
That takes about as...
All right.
When the guy doesn't have press conferences, he's golfing all the time. I mean, how does he have energy? He doesn't work. That's how he has energy. Hasn't done a fucking thing in a year and a half. So, you know, yeah.
Is there is there anything that you could look over at some of his supporters and go, okay, I get why I get where they're coming from. I understand it. Because I mean, we're really truly divided right now. I don't know if anybody's mind has changed over the last year.
Well, I know that people have, and this is another thing I talk about, but there's a Twitter thing called Trump Regrets, or something like that. It has both those words, and there might be another word, but it's about people who are regretting their vote for Trump, and then they tweet it out, and this sort of collects them all. So I know that from the very beginning, there have been people, and I think as the tax cuts become a little bit more tangible to them, a little bit more like they understand exactly what's happening and what they're going to start losing services, and then very quickly, you know, they'll start some kind of austerity program floating that idea, like we're going to have to cut Medicaid and Social Security, and we're going to have to raise the retirement age because they have to, because they don't have the money to pay for it, because we took that money and we gave some poor people $80 and we gave some rich people $80 billion. So in order to pay for that, that's what, and that's just going to happen. That's inevitable. And I think once that becomes apparent, people will start going, hey, wait a minute, because a lot of those people are affected specifically, primarily by their wallet. You know? And to speak to what you, how you started that question about, like, I understand that I don't agree with anything Trump has done. I think here's another thing is that he never fooled me. I wasn't fooled for a second. I was never on board. I didn't believe he wasn't anything but an obvious, blatant, psychopathic, narcissistic con man who's lies about everything. And is thin-skinned and vindictive and petty and not very bright. And I was never fooled. There was never a moment where I went that he thought that he was anything but that. And I think about like people who don't see that, and I think very clearly we are all getting our information from different sources. And I have certain news feeds on Twitter, and I'll check The Guardian and the New York Times and Washington Post and places that aggregate those news feeds, and not so much editorializing, but just the stories. And a lot of people aren't getting their information from those places, or they're getting a 2-sentence summation followed by "this is bullshit." It's a witch hunt, fake news, and so how can you compete with that? What I'm angry about. They're either dismissing that information outright, or they just don't have access to it, don't avail themselves of it, because they've been made to see that it's deeply suspicious, or it's the deep state, or it's some conspiracy bullshit, and so it's extremely frustrating, because you're angry, like with George W. Bush and the Iraq War. That was, everyone basically had the same information, but we were disagreeing on whether it was valid or not, but we all were coming from we were looking at the same thing, and somebody's like, well, I think that's a good idea. Well, I think that's a bad idea. But there's none of that with Trump. There's no, just people aren't getting. I check into Fox News every once in a while. If I'm constipated, I'll use it. And I have a daughter, a little baby girl, and so we'll watch Fox and Friends for her in the morning. But it's just two different. And that's it. I mean, it was starting back in those days, but I mean, it's unlike anything I've ever seen or ever experienced anywhere. They're just not getting. We're not getting the same information. So to watch me or whoever ranting and raving about it, people are like, "What are you talking about?"
Yeah. Well, there is we don't have a Walter Cronkite type thing where everybody in the country watches anymore. And I think no matter what side you're on, we tend to go to a place that makes us feel comfortable. And debates are just screaming matches if they happen at all. So it's really
and also the the news show, CNN, Fox, MSNBC, whenever they have their panel on, it's all like-minded people, and then there's occasionally a token member from just center left, center right on the show, and then they all yell at that person.
Right.
We're not accomplishing anything intellectually.
Remember when Hannity used to have that partner on too, that
Alan Colmes?
Yeah, Alan Colmes, and Alan Colmes,
the saddest man in news.
Yes, it was. It was kind of the Washington Generals. I mean, you would just watch that show.
That's the best.
Yeah, but even when you used to watch wrestling, and it would be Hulk Hogan against some guy named Bill Wellington from New Jersey, you just get stumped. But that was
Alan Colmes was the. The guy in the Star Trek episodes, who would be sent out to the, you go check, you'd hear his name once or twice.
Yeah.
Go check out, and I'll run point, sir. Yes. And
yeah, there you go. But you don't overly feel good about the other cable news networks either, do you? I mean, if you look at some of the other ones, it's not, most of the time it's not actual news.
Well,
it's commentary.
Yes, but it's commentary based on news. I think, though, the biggest problem started with the idea and the advent of 24-hour news stations. And while it was kind of an interesting, good idea on paper, once you add capitalism to that and, ad revenue and ratings and sensationalist shit, and it's a circus. It's bullshit. It's garbage.
It is.
And it's hard to discern. Sorry.
We have 4 major news things, 24 hours, and you don't hear shit about Puerto Rico. You have no idea of where they are. They just doesn't show up because I guess it doesn't get ratings.
Well, that's a great example of what I was talking about earlier, is that's all over some of my Twitter stuff. And people will I'm actually sorry, you can't see this at home. I don't know what. That's really sad. I'm doing on my hand. I'm doing the swiping motion. That's disturbing. All right, I'm sorry. I'm going to put my hands over here. But so that's something that I know about, that you know about, because of some of the news feeds that you avail yourself of, but other people don't. So. Again, in a thinking of it in stand-up terms, to go out there and do 5 minutes of ranting about Puerto Rico, I think people are like, "What are you talking about?"
Yeah.
What? They're not even part of America, right? What do you? Yeah. Wait, Puerto Rico is Cuba, yeah? I just don't think people would know. Yeah. But to you, to me, to several of us here, it's an outrageous, almost criminal thing, and just people don't understand why you're upset,
But it seems like now with these people that you're working with, different comedians are picking up a banner where maybe it used to be folk music, or maybe it was even rock music at one time. How do you think this has moved over where the comedians are getting involved?
Well, there's certainly room for everybody. You know, it's I guess perhaps musicians don't have the same platform that they used to with MTV. It was very prominent with the Rock the Vote and all that kind of stuff, and that just doesn't exist anymore, unless whatever slacker radio is going out to campuses. I don't see that happening too much, but it also just makes sense. Why not? And there are a number of comics who are passionate about social justice or things progressive ideas, and comedy is fairly inclusive. There's no discrimination in a sense with comedy, and it's definitely male centric, but there's plenty of great female comics.
And by the way, it's less than ever before. I mean, we're here
Less male-centric?
Yeah. I mean, there's just more women doing stuff now. I mean, for a couple of years, it was like...
Well, it was good while it lasted.
Yeah.
All right. You got to give them their 15 minutes, whatever. Yeah.
But I was going back to it can be a grind. It can grind you down. I remember when Janine, back around the 2000 or so, she was on many cable news places, and then just the opposition was coming at her hard.
Yeah.
Every single day.
Well, that's another part of it. Another facet is that the right wing is demonstrably more vicious and in attack mode than the leftists are, and they're able to very successfully rewrite the history of what you're seeing. The idea that there are people who are well respected, very popular, make a very good living at talking about how the white male is the most threatened, the most discriminated against human on the planet, white American male, white Christian American male, and they've successfully convinced so many people of that. I mean, that tells you something of their abilities to take what is clearly not true, you just have to walk down for about a block or two, just keep your eyes open, and you'll see that that's not the case. But they're able to take the Parkland kids.
Yeah.
I mean, we're all looking at the same thing. A guy went into a high school with a AR-15 and shot and killed 17 people, wounded scores more, and people whose lives are altered from that second on. And then these kids who just survived something I can't even imagine. I don't know how that would change me. I mean, it's hard to imagine and digest. Passionately said, we've got to do something. That was basically the beginning of the conversation, is we need to do something. And these kids were vilified, and people were like, I want to, shove a red hot poker up that, and that lesbian. I mean, just the most vile, vicious shit, with no humanity, no empathy, and just disgusting. And the fact that these kids are out there marching to create a safer environment, because a lot of us feel that it's not a good idea the answer isn't to fortify your schools. The answer is to create a culture, however you do that, that we didn't have 40, 50 years ago, 30 years ago, where you just, it's not an issue. You don't have 5-year-olds and 6 and 7-year-olds learning what to do when a crazy armed guy comes in with an assault rifle. And that's a scary thought, that people are okay with that and almost kind of pleased, and what they there's no equivalency on the left of that kind of behavior, of people denigrating these kids who also, let's keep in mind, not only did they do that, but they were so eloquent and brave, and they were a high school kid studying chemistry, and then a week later they're spokespeople for a fucking generation, and they're unflappable, and I couldn't have done that.
No, nobody in my high school could have pulled that off. I can't begin to tell you, and that's the first thing I thought. How dumb was my high school after I was watching these kids? Because no one would have been, you know what I mean? We would have yelled out, I don't know, Springsteen or some shit like that. You know what I mean? That's about as far as we were thinking, you know?
I mean, I'm so impressed, deeply impressed by them. But then again, they've grown up in this culture, whereas I'm an adult now looking back on how we got here, and they're just here. They're already here. They're born into this crazy world that they also are, because of the internet, can access, and traveling is much easier. And you can go abroad, and I travel fairly extensively, and it's not an issue. In most other countries, this isn't even close. It's insane, and people look at us like we're insane because we are insane, because those are insane ways to think.
Right. So where you're going around the country, people are like, we don't even get what's happening over there right now in America.
Yeah, I mean, they're very, it's easy to access the headlines, and the Parkland shooting wasn't the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, or 100th. Right. They're well versed in what our problems and issues are here, and when you have 1 million kids marching, and then you have the answer to that, people going, well, they're crisis actors, and they're fake, and they're Soros funded, and the Jewish cabal is just insane things. These are the same people who said for 8 fucking years Obama is going to come and take your guns, and he never took anybody's guns. And he never intended to, and that wasn't an issue. And there's, yeah.
No, well, we are today. There was another 2,500 schools kids walked out of, because today, as we're doing this, 19 years since Columbine, and those kids again. And I guess they're doing it on the internet, because I didn't see that this was coming. But I looked at the New York Post, and Washington Square Park was just packed with kids, which has been a place that's been the very beginning of every demonstration that we've had in the history of our country. And it is amazing to see that these kids aren't waiting, for David Cross or for any senator. They're doing this thing on their own.
And it's really encouraging and inspirational. And again, it's we didn't have that. We took these slow little baby steps, you and I and most people in this audience, to get to where we are. But again, those kids were born into that. They were born after Columbine.
Yes,
they were born when, shootings were just every month, a couple months or so, there'd be another sensationalized mass shooting. And the same thing's being said over and over again. So it's good that they're not waiting. They shouldn't wait, because we're not doing anything. And unless you elect different representatives and senators, nothing's going to change.
And even then, I think that we're more cynical than they are. Like, they actually believe that the world can be different. And I think we've seen.
Well, that's because they're young.
Yes, yeah.
Come on,
but
they don't know what.
Yeah, we've seen it start and stop quite a few times, and that probably is a good reason why somebody a lot younger should be leaning. But
we saw it stop on November of 2016. We saw it stop.
So that special that you did 2 years ago, the really interesting thing is, like, you can go back and watch that as a moment in time. It's almost seeing like a guy driving a car that he doesn't know is literally going to be going off the road in a little while,
Well, there's a point that it just makes me cringe. There's a part where I go, we don't know who's going to be the Republican nominee, and then I cross my fingers, and go, Trump, please, and that's like that just makes my stomach.
Yeah, right.
Like, but not that I think that I have superpowers. That is on me now, but
no, there was a lot of people doing that. They're like, if Trump gets in, that, and they even said that that day was shot.
He had no.
Yeah.
Well, he doesn't speak Russian, so a lot of the things would have to be translated, the communiques that were coming, and that would take a little while.
Yeah.
So.
But comedically, it does put everybody in a strange place, because if you're not talking about these things now, it's almost like there's a statement about that as well. Like you're almost saying, well, I'm more concerned with gate, you know what I mean, money, than I am anything else. I think that you could look up at a lot of comedians and go, I wonder why this is what bothers them.
Well, I don't know. I think that I don't really begrudge comics for not talking about it. If that's not in their wheelhouse, then they certainly shouldn't shoehorn it in or try to fit it in because they think it's the right thing to do. And if it's not naturally coming to them, then I don't begrudge a comic for getting up and especially like the kind of comics who don't really. It would be awkward and weird for a person who just does like anecdotal or absurdist humor, or just, an hour of, pop culture crap. It'd be odd if they tried to do it. So I don't begrudge anybody that. But again, I don't want to hear an hour of political humor ever.
But look at even the late night shows, like Fallon was doing tremendous. And then suddenly after Trump got elected, you're like, why is this guy playing Frisbee golf with pizzas? You know what I mean? What the fuck is going on with him? And then you go over to Colbert and you're like, what is this, MSNBC? You know what I mean? Like Trump does affect every single bit of everything that's going on.
Yeah. And in an even greater way, he's probably responsible for an explosion of peptic ulcers. Kids having difficulty sleeping. It all spiders out. Parents being sleep deprived and being shitty to their kids because of the latest outrage or whatever. And then they bully somebody at school, and it all goes back to Trump. But yeah, I mean, how can you not talk about it? It's almost speaking for like the late night show, late show comics and stuff, or post. You almost have to, But again, there's different ways to approach it. There's the outraged voice. There's the dismissive, and there are people like Fallon who just sort of comment on his hair or things like that don't really mean anything, But
he's got to be the most talked about human in history. I mean, I can't think.
He got his wish.
Yeah.
So it was a monkey's paw thing.
So what else? Where else do you go now? What else do you talk about or on stage as you're putting new stuff together?
Well, the majority, and I talk about this, but the majority of I was working very exclusively and focused on this show that I did in London. I was living in London. I created and wrote and directed this thing, and finished that, and came back to the States, and then moved. I came back on. My wife had come back ahead of me, and I came back. Then the next day, watched probably the worst sporting experience of my life, where the first half was wonderful, and it was a Super Bowl. And first half was like, oh my God, I can't believe this. This is awesome. And then it's just a blur. I haven't even watched. Took me a while to even to read recaps of it or watch film. I'm a Falcons fan, and it was brutal. Oh, it was awful. It was a crazy night, and and I drank so much whiskey too. Just I couldn't believe what was happening. I was with a bunch of people, and even I will say this, and there were a number of them, and I'm not exaggerating. The Patriots fans that were there, who are friends of mine, were really respectful and like understood. They understood what was happening. They didn't gloat, and these are Patriots fans. They were really respectful and considerate. It was a crazy night, and then woke up the next morning, moved, and then 9 days later had a kid, and then my whole world was having that kid, and so I was waiting to see if the show in England was going to get picked up, and I had a pretty good instinctive feeling like it wasn't going to get picked up, and I was like, they're going to make me wait around forever. I'm not going to wait for a year and then go, oh, what do I do now? So I assumed it wasn't going to get picked up, so I started working on cobbling material together and going out, but the entirety of my experience was a baby, and all my observations were about, and there are few types of comedy I can't stand more than having kids is weird, huh? So I mean, and all my friends who have kids and like, oh, shut the fuck up, I don't care, so I was really sensitive to that. So I talk about that. But of course, I have jokes and observations about being a dad, about being a kid, and also being an older, somebody came into it pretty late, and so that's a chunk of it. But there's some very dark stuff that is, I hope, mitigating because it's talking about a kid, and then stuff about Trump and stuff about the, cultural, where we are in regards to Trump and the divisiveness in this country, and then anecdotal stuff as well, which is kind of what I try to do. I try to get about a third. I don't want to go too heavy in one area, and then I just because I cannot help it, it's truly the thing that I find most fascinating is I talk about religion, and I have a really thing that's really fun to me about heaven, and it's a long, extensive thing about whether you have to still pray when you get to heaven, and it spins out from there, and it's a really fun thing that I enjoy doing because I love talking about religion in any capacity, and it's also. It's one thing to do shows in Austin and Boston and, progressive urban areas. But, I'm going to be hitting a lot of places that I did, like on the last tour. I did 111 shows, and I was in a lot of places I've never been to before. Some I'll never go back to. And when I say that, people walked out. I mean, there's, I was in, places I'd never heard of before, Sioux Falls. And I was in, what's the flattest place in the world in North Dakota? Bismarck. I was in Bismarck. And, a lot of that kind of material just doesn't, and you definitely get the sense everywhere I went that there were a majority of people who were like, so thank you so much for coming here. Thank you. Oh my God. Usually we have to drive 8 hours to go, into, Milwaukee or whatever. And is that right? Somebody look at a map.
Yeah, it's definitely not right. Yeah, it's definitely Milwaukee. Yeah, there's no doubt.
If you lived in Bismarck, where'd you go? Like Minnesota?
Yeah, probably Minnesota, right? Yeah, because I saw the movie Fargo, so I understand.
Now, Fargo was great. I loved, and I'm going back there on this next tour. I had a blast in Fargo. That was great.
Can I tell you something, though? It's changed. It's right. Sad. Sad what happened to
They put the CVS in, and it's 2 stories, and it's just blocks out the sun, and all the hipsters hang out. Yeah.
But when you go into those towns, you probably have people coming out who are more or less kind of a minority opinion. You know what I mean? And they get to go to your show, and it's suddenly like Comic-Con for them or something.
Well,
you know what I mean? They could just be.
They absolutely. It's like for a brief period of time, they feel like they're the majority, and there's a voice, and there's somebody here who came to them. And again, I don't want this to sound condescending, but it's a lot of these places just don't get that many of the bigger acts, are
Right.
not going to go to a number of these places, and you definitely got a sense of people were so energized. Like there's this guy who's saying this thing that I've always because once you walk out of that theater and you get back to the town or the suburbs, and they're in the minority and they're the weirdos,
Yeah.
Especially if it's a religious community,
But that it really, like we say red states and blue states, but it really is like blue cities and red country. You know what I mean? Like
we're right here. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, look at Texas.
look at New York though. If
Yeah.
you move outside of any of the cities, you see Trump signs.
Yeah.
You know?
It's very true. Yeah.
And that's always always a curious thing to me, why it's that way.
Well, I would imagine part of it is seeing what works. If you're in a urban environment and you see that it works, and that black people, white people, gay people, Jewish people, Latinx and trans and they're all working together, and nobody just pays any attention to it, and
Right.
and it just works. It just people exist, and sometimes they'll go their separate ways after work or whatever. And there's still a lot of these major cities are highly segregated. I mean, Atlanta's very segregated. Houston's very segregated. I mean, the majority of blacks live on the south side, and the majority of the whites live on the north side. But everybody gets together, and they all, for the most part, get along, and everything works. And perhaps when people move there or have short-term stay, they can see, this actually works, and they're from a community that doesn't have a lot of diversity in it, or they're taught to be suspicious or on a minor level fearful of the black people or the Muslim people that live down the street, and that's what we teach our kids. That's certainly what I'm teaching my daughter. I'm having her homeschooled, but I'm not homeschooling her. I found a crazy lady, and
I know that you have taken some heat too from the left for more or less language or even ideas.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think that's happened as time has moved on?
I think the left is quite often as guilty, if not more guilty. In fact, I will say they're more guilty of being intolerant to an idea if that idea has any kind of language in it which they have already decided is hurtful, and there's no discussion. I'm sorry to keep bringing up bits, and I don't want to do them because it's you'll have to wait. but I have a whole bit about that, basically about in arguments I would have with Clinton supporters. I was a Bernie Sanders supporter, and
There was one.
But did you? There was one, but the most timid. That's what I'm talking. You got to get out there and use your voice. If I said Trump supporter, people would be like, "Fuck yeah!" I was a Sanders supporter.
Yeah.
Happy face emoji. And my wife and I got into some serious arguments, and especially with her friends. And I don't back down. In fact, I love it. You bring 10 hardcore feminists at me, I'll go fucking toe to toe, me against them. I'm happy. And they don't know it, but they'll they lose the argument. They don't know it.
They don't know it.
But like, I have a whole bit about that. I obviously don't want to get in. But yes, I do. And I also I've gotten in trouble numerous times for saying the word nigger. But I say it in the context of a racist, always. And people have a real problem with that. And I just will never. I grew up in Roswell, Georgia, in the 70s, 80s, and that is the word people used. And you can't make a point, talk about a racist, and then say anything but that. It sounds false. It is false, and it sounds, man, you know what I hate? Those motherfucker N-words. It just doesn't sound right. So, and it's not like I use it all the time, but there have been, roughly 5, 6, 7 times throughout my career where I've said it in the context of a character or something, or quoting Trent Lott, or yeah, seriously. And then people, and I think part of it is this, there's this kind of pussification in a sense. There's this kind of thing of like, hey, I get what you're trying to do, but there are other people who are really sensitive and it might hurt their feelings. And, I don't have the time to explain to them, there's this feeling of like, it's either I get it, but it's not, you're going to make us look bad kind of thing, or going to hurt my friend's feelings. Or people who just are, no, you can't use that word ever again, done. To people who are so far to the left that they're now to the right, where they literally they're okay with taking it out of, Huckleberry Finn. They're okay with taking the word, Injun Joe and nigger out, because that's how people talk. That's all sprinkled through the book. And that's absurd. That's right. That's absurd and not even worth the discussion. But you have to have the discussion because there are more people who are like, that's wrong. You can't do it ever. And, look, if it's gratuitous, then I can see their point. But if it's not gratuitous, then I don't concede, and I never will.
Yeah, and it is true. There was no point like years ago that anyone would have thought, oh, the left will start book burning. You know what I mean? The left will start pulling
they
stuff
can be
out of,
just as bad.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just as bad. Strident, not anti-intellectual, not thinking. There's no room for discussion. Mm-hmm. And it's frustrating.
I think that people think if something can't be fixed really fast, it's not worth dealing with. You know what I mean? Like these things that we're talking about in this country and really the world are going to take they probably won't be solved in our lifetimes, and there's no shot out of it. But if you think of like when Teddy Roosevelt started to say, all right, this needs to be a forest and this needs to be protected, and no one was near it at the time. He wasn't doing it for anybody who was living at that time. And that's where kind of greatness comes from.
Politicians, the very last thing they would ever do, it's complete anathema to them, is think long term. And nobody's interested in, like, look, the New York subway system was potentially could have been the greatest. And there was a time when it was relatively modernized. And now it's really getting worse by the year, and it has for quite a while now. And it's really important. It's as important as electricity is to making that the one of the strongest economies in the world work. And you have to have that subway. You have to get people from point A to point B. And it's feasible. It's possible. You would have to set aside money. You would have to be an unpopular mayor or governor for a little bit of time, and then we can all look back, go, man, this guy saved the city. He modernized. He made a subway system which we all use. We're proud to use it. It's it's a shining example for other urban centers around the world. But nobody's going to go. We're going to go into debt, and yes. 10 years after I'm dead, you guys will be thanking me. But nobody's going to do that. But it needs to be done.
Austin is a city that their traffic problems come from the fact that no one thought that it was going to grow. You know what I mean? They're like, yeah, there's not that many people here right now, so let's not worry about it. And now it's tough to get around.
There is an amazing book called The City in Mind. I believe the author is named James Kunstler. You realize what that guy has had to deal with that his entire life. He wrote an amazing book. Then you mention his name and people like
that's the most embarrassing thing I've ever seen happen.
I beg your pardon, sir. My name is Cunt Slur. There's a separation. But it's so funny and smart and vicious, and he takes I'm not sure, I think it's 8 cities throughout history and talks about their urban planning, and Atlanta is one of them, and it is vicious. It's all true, and he talks about that. He talks about how they had numerous opportunities because it went through growth spurts, unlike a lot of cities that kind of seem to have kind of a steady flow, maybe a little, a spurt here and there. But Atlanta's was kind of nothing for a while, then a spurt in the 60s, then kind of flat line, and then big as they got the Olympics, which was all rigged, and they weren't capable of doing it correctly and suffered for it. And then all these big growth spurts and because of racism, because of a number of things, but mostly racism, they never put money into. They have a subway system, MARTA, that when I was a kid, the joke was, and this is hilarious. What does MARTA stand for? Moving Africans Rapidly Through Atlanta. So that's the nice kind of racism you get at the polite, genteel Southern. But they never did anything, and it just grew, and they have one of the worst traffic situations, if not the worst, in the country, and LA is very similar, just sprawl, and it's nasty, and it affects things in so many ways, and plus when you have all that new tarmac and the heat and climate change and things and less trees to absorb it, and it compounds it, and then everybody's adding air conditioning because it's brutal out there. We have to add more air conditioning, and wait do you see what happens to London. As London heats up, and I've spent many years there, and their summers are getting slowly but surely a little bit more intolerable, longer stretches of heat, and they don't have air conditioning. And you watch as more homes get air conditioning, and it gets exponentially worse and worse and worse and worse and worse.
So that is that is the bottom line, I think, in this country, is that we refuse to see it as complicated. I think when we were kids and they said, this is the greatest country in the world to us, when we were in first grade, and people are repeating that now. But if anyone said to you, I'm a great person or I'm a great guy, you would back off. You would be nervous about that guy.
Unless it was Trump, who says it all the time.
Yeah. But I think that's one of the reasons that he did well with people, because they're like, oh yeah, I remember hearing that when I was a kid, and we refuse to say that this is complicated and this is tough stuff.
Yeah, and there's also a vilification of people who bring up the fact like, hey, this thing doesn't work. Here are some solutions to it, and they don't want to hear about those solutions. Like, what's also frustrating and confounding is that you have all these examples of here's some red states that tried this kind of economic program. You look at Kansas and what Brownback did with slashing taxes, and they're deeply in the hole, and they all know it. And you look at these other states that have skyrocketing teenage pregnancies, and they'll go, teenage pregnancy is terrible. That's why you have to teach abstinence. And we've had decades and decades and decades and decades of research to say, no, that doesn't work. The opposite works. And they will ignore that fact because of an ideal that they're clinging on to. Even though all of the research tells them the exact opposite. What is the thing you want? Do you want more teenage pregnancies or less teenage pregnancies? Well, we want less, of course, for several reasons. Okay, here's what you got to do. No. That idea, that goes against God. Like, all right, I don't know what to tell you. I mean, here's yet some more money from the state of New York for you guys to prop up your feeble education center, because you're the most dependent on federal dollars. Yeah. Sorry. This isn't very funny at all.
Yeah, but you know what? They knew it coming in. They're like, oh, shit. You would feel it in the first 5 minutes. But here's what I'm going to ask you, because you have the kid. Are you what are you optimistic about when it comes to this?
I am optimistic about raising a child in Brooklyn. I'm glad I don't have to. I'm glad she's not. I had a pretty shitty childhood, and there are a lot of mean, shitty people in it, and I'm, she already, yeah. So I'm glad to be able to bring up a kid in that kind of environment, tolerant, culturally vibrant, and there's all kinds of stimulation everywhere, and I vacillate wildly day to day, pretty much depending on if I've looked at Twitter or not. But sometimes I'm optimistic, and I think we're going to get through this. And there's this feeling, this weight on me, and I think a lot of other people, which is, this is horrible. Somebody needs to fix this. And this kind of sinking feeling as you keep reading the news, going, nobody in Congress, there's 500 and some odd people in Congress, and they're not making anything better. And there's 320 million Americans going, help us. Well, not 320 million. I don't know. I mean, some of them have died off, but there's a lot. Most people are going, somebody, this is terrible. Help, and this is wrong for the health of this country, whose ideals we all believe in and subscribe to, and so I guess I feel like November is going to be a watershed moment. It's going to be a huge, huge thing. And there will be either cause for optimism, or there will just, the sinking feeling will get even weightier and will sink further down, and it could be really depressing. But none of these people, did you see the Ted Cruz thing he penned for Trump?
Yes, it was amazing.
I mean, that's what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Like that. Absolutely. I mean, these people have no soul. They're complete. I just this kind of careerist politician, double talking, hypocrite bullshit is. November is really important, and just to bring it back to what we started with, that's part of the comedy resistance, making sure people register to vote. We don't tell anybody how to vote, what they should do, but it's important to vote,
Well, I'm going to just say this. I think what you're doing is so different than what I remember where your head was. The fact that you're even involved in this, I would have thought this is something that you would have made fun of years ago.
I probably will if I look back, but I know it sounds trite but it is they say it every year. They say it every election. This is the most important election,
Yeah.
but because of the last election, which was very important, now this is really truly the most important election. So.
Well, thanks so much for sitting in here with us today.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
And it's great seeing you guys. David Cross, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.